Hey there, my people. Today, I'll be sharing with you an episode from The Outer Limits titled The Sixth Finger. It involves a coal miner who volunteers for a radical scientific experiment that transforms him into a being far beyond that of a mere human. He's smarter, stronger, and unfortunately, he becomes dangerously detached from mankind, from his humanity. This episode stars David McCallum from the old school, well-known hit show, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., where he played Ilya Kuryakin. He also played Ducky in the hit series NCIS. Peeps, this episode asks the age-old question of how far is too far? Well, that's the setup. Let's get to it. The scene opens with Kathy, the bread girl, heading over to Professor Mather's house with a loaf of bread. She knocks on the door, calling out, "Mrs. Ives, Mrs. Ives," and getting no response, she opens the door and walks in. You know what? This would so not be me. Peeps, look at this. This place is huge. It looks big from the outside, but once you get inside the place, it really looks big and scary. And most people would say, okay, my kid sister said everything scare you, and she might not be too wrong, but no, I don't think I'd go walking through this house. I think if I open up the door, I'm going to stand near the door and call out for Miss Ives, but I'm not going to start walking around touching stuff. So Kathy is looking around and she sees a door over to the side and she opens it. It's a lab and Professor Mathers is there working. After a moment, he notices her and he asks, "What are you doing here?" She says, "I'm Kathy. I brought bread and I was looking to be paid by Mrs. Ives." The professor says she's never around when she's needed. It's impossible to find good help. I can't even find an assistant. "Fresh bread, did you say? Give it here." And Kathy says that'll be 1 and tuppence. And peeps, that's like British money from back in that day. And so I did do some checking, and the equivalent in U.S. money would be about 16 cents for that loaf of bread. And the professor says, "Oh, of course. I didn't take time out for breakfast, and I've been working all night, and apparently he's hungry now since he sees the bread." And so he hands her the money, and she gives him the loaf. And so Kathy doesn't appear to be in a hurry to leave, so she asks him, "What kind of work do you do here?" And the professor says, "I'm a professor of genetics." "Genetics?" Kathy asks. And then this monkey shows up and the professor says, "This is Darwin." Okay, peeps, this is clearly a person in a really bad looking monkey suit, but understandably so, it's 1963, and this is probably the best monkey suit they could come up with. Now, interesting enough, in just a few years, right around 1968, this is the monkey suit you get with Planet of the Apes starring Charlton Heston. Peeps, excellent movie as far as I'm concerned. So, the professor says to Darwin, "You're hungry too, huh? Well, you've had a hard night," and he tears the monkey off a hunk of the bread and hands it to him.
Have you teached him any tricks?
Oh, much more than that. File these under MG.
So Kathy is really impressed by all this, and she asks, "However did he become so smart?" And the professor says, "I made him that way." And Kathy asks, "Can you do that with people too?" The professor says, "Why do you ask?" And Kathy responds, "There's someone I'd like to be smart for." Then the professor asks her, "Who are your parents?" And she says, "I don't have any." And the professor says, I'd like a sample of your blood. And he tells her it's all right, it won't hurt, and he takes the sample. Next, we see Kathy back at her sister's store in a mining town. Two guys come into the store, Willem and Wilt. And we can tell that they're mining guys because they're covered in the dirt and grit from the mines. Wilt gets a little handsy with Kathy, and Willem has to put him in his place. Kathy tells her sister that the professor really liked the bread, and so the sister sends Kathy off with another loaf to sell. Willem says, I'm going that way, I'll walk with you, and the pair leaves. Peeps, this next scene, I believe, is super important for understanding the Willem character.
The foreman told the manager that I've been making trouble among the miners and acting myself superior. The manager called me in his office, asked me if I thought I was too good for the job. So I told him, as maybe I was.
Well, peeps, not surprisingly, Willem got fired. He tells Kathy that there's at least one good thing out of all of this, and that's he'll be able to turn his back on the mine.
Well, it's one good thing. I'll be able to turn my back on that mine. I wish I could turn my back on that whole town forever. How can a man go forward here? It's the most backward place in the world.
Where would you go then?
Peeps, Willem tells her he'd go anywhere away from all this dirt and stupidity, anywhere away from the black mine that's to blame for it all. It would give me great pleasure to see this whole town utterly destroyed. Kathy says, you'll go forward, Willem. You're smarter than the others. Willem says, I'm too smart to eat coal dust for the rest of my life. I wish I was smart. Kathy says, well, you're not stupid. That's the big difference between you and them others. And Willem says this, all I need is one lucky break, a job where I could use my head, and I show them. I'd ride around in a sports car and wear a big gold ring. Then Willem looks up towards the porch and sees the professor standing there. The professor looks at them, then he turns and goes back into the house, shutting the door behind him. Then Kathy has a bright idea.
Why don't you ask him for a job?
Don't be ridiculous.
Well, Kathy talks Willem into giving it a try, and so next we see the housekeeper, Mrs. Ives, informs the professor that young Kathy has come to see him. Show her in, Mrs. Ives. And then he says to Kathy, I'm sorry to have to disappoint you. I'm afraid your blood is the wrong type. Kathy says, that's not why I've come. Here's my friend Willem Griffith. Willem says, Kathy here tells me you're in need of an assistance. I've come to apply for the job. Okay, you know what? Dude. How you gonna look this trashed up and then tell yourself you coming to apply over at the professor's big old house for a job? And dude, you didn't get cleaned up. You didn't change clothes. You didn't put on any deodorant. Dude, you didn't even brush your teeth or wipe your face. But you showing up for this job and you think you up for it. You think you've got the medal for it. And you don't even have common sense for this job. All right. So the professor gives him the once over and tells Willem that the job is more than he can handle. And Kathy says, if you could teach a monkey, couldn't you teach Willem? And you know what? I can appreciate she just said that, but that would sound toe up to me if I was Willem. But anyway, she says, couldn't you teach Willem, who's smarter than anyone in town? And the professor tells her it's not that simple. He says learning is worthless without the brain capacity to use it. And peeps, that's very, very key to this story.
That's what I'm working on. Racing against time, trying to speed up the slow process of evolution by a molecular approach to genetics.
Peeps, he's talking about the intelligence of man growing and enhancing through evolution to become a better self, but he doesn't want to wait the centuries and the eons it's going to take for that to happen. He wants to enhance man on the molecular level to get him there right now, believing that if man is intelligent enough, he will decide to be good enough. And he says, I've already succeeded with that ape. He's almost human. If I could do it with a man, create the man of the future who could rise above the animal passions which lead to violence and self-destruction, and develop the intelligence that's necessary for a peaceful and civilized coexistence. And you want to know what the sad tale about all this is, peeps? In stories like this, it's the belief that we just need to be smart enough or brilliant enough to be kind to one another. So, after this big lofty speech, Willem says, will you do it with me? The professor says, you? And Willem says, yes. The professor says, you realize an experiment always has its dangers. And clueless Willem, who has no idea what he's signing up for, says, I'm game for anything. It's better than crawling back to that mine and spending the rest of my life like an animal in the dark.
Mrs. Ives. Take him out and clean him up, Mrs. Ives.
So next, we see a cleaned up Willem back at the lab. The professor directs him to sit, stretch out his arm, and make a fist. After he's taken the blood sample, the professor looks at it under a microscope. His blood is compatible for the experiment. Willem asks him, have I passed the test? And the professor says, you'll do. And Willem responds, then let's get on with it. And the professor says, immediately, and he goes about explaining to Willem what will happen. He says he'll be using selective wavelengths through which he can stimulate the genes in every cell of Willem's body.
So that the superior genes become much stronger than the backward ones and eventually dominate them, thereby accelerating the inborn mechanism of evolution to a fantastically high speed.
Peeps, he tells Willem that this lever encompasses the entire evolutionary history of the human race. And he tells him that he'll be the first man ever to go forward into our biological future. So the professor says, are you still determined to go through with it? Willem doesn't answer him. He just turns and walks into the chamber. He sits down and the professor closes the chamber door. The professor turns on the machine, sets some dials, and moves the lever up to the forward position. And brother man is just sitting there, and peeps, he's not even sweating this. Maybe working in the mines have made him brave and tough. The experiment is done. The professor raises the door, and we see Willem with his arms across his face. And you know what, peeps? That makes me nervous. Because, you know what? I don't want to see something messed up looking, kind of monster face thing going on. All right. You know what? That's not so bad. Willem comes out of the chamber and he says, you didn't tell me my body would change. The professor says, I wasn't prepared for a physical mutation in the man of 20,000 years from now. Peeps, that's how far into the future Willem has evolved. 20,000 years. The professor says,
Your heightened forehead indicates more currents in your neuronic synapses required for greater intelligence and telepathic function.
He goes on to say, your eyes have developed a wider field of vision and a power of charged concentration. Your hand reveals the bud of a sixth finger, which suggests an additional dexterity will develop in the man of the future. Then Willem asks,
Afraid you maybe gave power to the wrong man?
What makes you say that?
You should have realized by now, Professor Mathers, that I can read your mind.
all right, you know what? People, this is how come I say you shouldn't be messing with stuff. Because 9 times out of 10, or in a lot of cases 10 times out of 10, you did not prepare for all contingencies. You mess with something without taking into consideration how that something can get away from you. With Willem, you got this whole big old brain thing that has involved, but you want to know something? The heart and the soul of Willem, I will bet anything that has not changed inside that dude. But I guess we're going to see Peeps. Later, we see Willem sitting at a desk, and he appears to be taking a test. And Peeps, brother man is whizzing right through it. He hands it to the professor, and the professor glances at it. It appears that he's aced the test because the professor says this is useless like all the others. Our tests aren't sufficient to measure your mind in its advanced state. And the professor tosses the test to the floor. Willem says, what good is intelligence without knowledge? I'm hungry to know things, learn things, and he shoves papers and things off the table and tells the professor to fetch him books. Books about everything, all the books you have. I want to read them all. Do you understand? I want to read them. And Willem gets up and storms out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Sometime later, we see Willem in the study reading through a stack of books. Peeps, Willem seems to be in his new element, and that's absorbing all the knowledge available to him. Meanwhile, Kathy has come with bread, and she asks Miss Ives about Willem because she hasn't seen him for days. Miss Ives says something's peculiar going on, and it can't be good. Look at what the professor done with that monkey. It ain't natural. Kathy says, maybe he'll see me. Please. And Mrs. Ives says, come on, and she leads Kathy to where Willem is holed up. Mrs. Ives knocks on the door and says, you have a visitor. Willem is reading, and he says, I can't see anyone. Mrs. Ives says, it's Miss Kathy, come to see you. And Willem doesn't react at all or even stops reading. He simply says, go away, don't bother me. And Peeps, Kathy sadly walks away. I feel for that girl because it seems like Willem was her only true friend. And now she doesn't even have that. Next, we hear the sound of music being played on a piano. It's Bach. Hearing the music, the professor goes to investigate, and needless to say, Peeps, Willem is up there throwing down. The professor asks,
Have you always been able to play this well?
I have never before touched the keys of a piano.
Yeah, I'm surprised too. Willem explains playing the piano is only a matter of mathematics and, to a certain degree, of manual dexterity. And he goes on to say that man produces little that is lasting, truly lasting.
Fear, informity, immorality. These are heavy burdens, great drainers of creative energy. And when we are drained of creative energy, we do not create. We procreate what we do not create.
Peeps, Willem has gone from a guy who was dissatisfied about his life to a guy who's cynical about life, period. People, he's not making this commentary about his life alone. Rather, he's making a sweeping statement concerning all of mankind. And when somebody starts going down this road, that's when you need to really pay attention to them. The professor says, I must get some sleep. And Willem responds, yes, you must. And they make their good nights. So it's the dawn of the next day, peeps, and Willem goes into the professor's room, and we can see that the professor is sleeping. Willem drops the books on the floor and announces, I finished these books. The professor looks at his watch, then he rolls over and says, it's dawn, why aren't you sleeping? And Willem says,
I no longer have any need for sleep.
How is it possible?
Must the pupil explain to the teacher? It's really quite simple.
You know what, Pete? Look at that head. I have to say the makeup on Willem is really good from a 1963 standard. So the professor is looking at this Willem, who looks different than he did the day before, and the professor is going, what the heck? And that's me paraphrasing, peeps. And Willem tells him the reason for his altered look is really quite simple.
You released the mechanism of evolution, which is a self-generating force. I am now where man will be approximately 1 million years from today.
Why are you laughing?
I am laughing at what is in your mind, Professor. You think that I've become a monster.
Peeps, Willem is saying that this self-generating force that the professor released is mutating all by itself. And he is the future man 1 million years from today. In essence, he's what man will evolve naturally to become. And Dr. von Frankenstein here, realizing what he's done, has a solution.
We'll stop this self-generating process before it's too late. We must return to the chamber immediately. We'll set the dial backward somewhere nearer to man.
Would you be willing to go back to an ape, Professor?
Peeps, Brother Man has put the whammy on the professor. Apparently, Willem has developed more than just the ability to read minds. It looks like he can control a person's actions. In actuality, controlling the person themselves. Now, this your monster, Professor. Whatever are you going to do about it? Sometime later in the day, Mrs. Ives shows up with a stack of books in her arms. She knocks on the door and Willem says, "Who's there?" Mrs. Ives says, "More books for you," and Willem tells her to leave them outside. Mrs. Ives puts the books down and she turns and walks away. But peeps, she doesn't really leave. She walks down the hall and ducks into a corner to watch Willem come out for the books. When he does, Sister Girl gets a look at him and she gasps. And hearing her, he turns.
Wait. No. Please.
So hearing Sister Girl hit the floor, the professor comes running out. He checks out Mrs. Ives and says she's gone. And he asks, was it an accident? Willem says,
Your race is too prejudiced to tolerate any differences from its own kind. She saw me only as a monster, and it was in her mind to run to the village and arouse its inhabitants. They would come with their primitive weapons to obliterate me.
and so he says, I stopped her heart. The professor asks him, you feel no remorse? And Willem says, would it bring her back? The professor says, she was, after all, a human being, the same as ourselves. And Willem says this, she was the same as you, Professor. See, this is what you get, people. This is what you get when you start monkeying around with advancing intellect without advancing the heart first. And peeps, he adds this. Willem says, to me, she was no more advanced than a monkey. She wouldn't have become civilized for another 1,000,000 years. Sometime later, we see Kathy at the house. People, she hasn't laid eyes on Willem since this whole experiment began, so she's in for a big old surprise. She's outside the door of his room, and she raises her hand to knock.
Come in, Kathy. It is no longer possible for me to hide from others.
Peeps, there's been some rumors behind Mrs. Ives' sudden heart attack, and apparently the town constable has visited the house a couple of times to speak with the professor. Willem says, ignorance breeds fear. And then Willem asks Kathy,
why aren't you afraid of me?
We're friends, Willem. You've always been kind to me.
Are you still not afraid of me?
dang, okay, that's a look. Shout out peeps to whoever did the makeup for this. Remember, it's 1963, and so for that era, I think this is pretty good. And I just love the reveal. His back is to her, partially hidden in the shadows. His calm tone as he's talking to her, and then he turns, and this whole head is right there in your face. That is a good reveal.
What happened?
I saw him.
I saw him. And now the chick is running for her life. The professor pulls Kathy into the lab and she's yelling at him. What terrible thing have you done, you rotten old man? And then she settles down a bit and says, bring him back. Please, sir, bring him back to me the way he was. Sister girl, I'm not sure that's even possible now. So Willem comes downstairs and he says this.
The whole town must be utterly destroyed. An example must be made.
See, this is what you get, peeps. And Willem is standing there giving this whole lofty speech saying, the human race has a gift, Professor, a gift that sets it above all the other creatures that abound upon this planet. The gift of thought, of reasoning, of understanding, the highly developed brain. But the human race has ceased to develop, Willem says. It struggles for petty comfort and false security. There is no time for thought. Soon there will be no time for reasoning, and man will lose sight of the truth. The whole town must be utterly taken out. An example must be made. See, peeps, this is what happened when you give absolute power, meaning power you yourself can no longer control, to somebody who doesn't have a good heart. If you'll remember, peeps, Willem hated this town from the very beginning. And now that he's this super brainiac who can think and come up with ways to better everybody's situation just because he's so powerful with this powerful brain, he would just as soon destroy the entire town, quote unquote, as an example. And there you have it, people. Absolute power can corrupt. Absolutely. So, peeps, the professor is going to end this by pulling a pistol on Willem.
Stand back.
Peeps, before Willem can get to town, he has another evolutionary leap. He and Kathy are together in the lab, and he says, I was going to destroy everyone. and suddenly it no longer mattered. I've evolved beyond hatred or revenge or even the desire for power. I could feel myself reaching that stage in the dim future of mankind when the mind will cast off the hamperings of the flesh and become all thought and no matter. A vortex of pure intelligence in space. It's the goal of evolution. Then he says, but that is far ahead, and I'm impatient to go the whole way. Kathy, that's why I need your help. Kathy says, my help? And Willem says, I shall return to the chamber, and you must turn this down to its furthest limit, all the way into the future, into infinity. Kathy says, you mustn't go any further. Come back to me the way you were. Willem says, won't you help me now to achieve the ultimate? Come, Kathy, we haven't much time. As soon as I enter the chamber, push this to the word forward, all the way. Do you understand? Not backwards. That's into the past. Willem steps over to the machine and Kathy opens the door. Then Willem goes inside and sits. And he says,
now must I break the last barrier between the flesh.
I can't let you go.
Kathy is pushing the lever back, and peeps, it seems to be working. We can see that the change in Willem is reversing. And seeing it herself, Kathy keeps pushing the lever in the reverse direction. Peeps, she's looking at him and not at the lever or the dials. She's not paying attention to just how far back she's going. Peeps, it looks like the old Willem, but does it? This Willem looks just the slightest tad different. Not so angry, not as disheartened as the other Willem. He leaves the chamber and walks over to Kathy. He reaches out to touch her tears when he collapses to the floor.
I brought him back. I think he's glad.
If the ending seemed less than exciting, the reason for that could be that this wasn't the original written ending to this episode. The original ending had Willem evolving backwards so far that he evolved into a protoplasmic form of a jellyfish. Well, the network censors felt the religious groups would take offense to the ending, so it was written out and this new ending was written in. People, I love this episode. I love it when people tinker with things they shouldn't and it blows up in their face. David McCallum was great as Willem, and you believed the angry hopelessness he had, not so much for the town, but people for his station in life. He wanted something more. He wanted something better, but he just didn't know how to get that. I wanted to hit the professor in the head because he was big time irresponsible. You almost need to have the end of something all figured out before you go down certain roads because you can't always stop a speeding train. As for Kathy, I thought the kid was sweet. She cared for Willem and just wanted for him what he wanted for himself. Well, my people, there you have it. Leave a comment if you wish, but remember the rules. No politics, religion, personal views, or personal platforms, because all of that will get deleted. I'm only interested in specifically talking about movies and TV programs, straight, no chaser, nothing more. As always, shout out to my subscribers. Thank y'all so much for committing to the channel. And to my viewers, I'm so happy you guys stopped by to look at the content. Feel free to subscribe, like, give me a thumbs up to keep the content moving. All right, my people, spread kindness where you are, and remember to take out some time to show kindness to yourself. Bye-bye for now.